In today's video, we're going to be covering the stories of what it's like being forced to serve in the army, what happens if you don't go, what does it mean to be called a dumpling, how harsh and dangerous is it, how much do you get paid, this and much more to come. Quickly to jump into a couple of images from my army service as well to show it that this is real, This was me back in the day when I probably was still in the early stages of my training, very proper uniform that I'm allowed to go out in the city with, and also I would walk around probably in the military base. And this is me towards the end of my service, where in the forest I think we just finished our final exercise, and after that that was it. So couple of interesting things when it comes to joining the army. While you're in the military service, you actually also need to pledge allegiance that you're pretty much willing to fight and die for your country. And I did some actual digging into what's the law, and it seems that if you don't answer the calling to either then go to the army or service or any kind of gathering even after you have served your term, you can be fined up to 200 days of your working salary, or you can get 15 days of jail. At least in my country. So what's happening here? Estonia is one of the 49 countries in the world, which is actually quite a lot of countries have mandatory military service. So everybody here who's male in the ages of 18 to 17 has to go and serve in the army, at least from anywhere from 8 to 11 months. That's now a little bit depends on when you're called, but pretty much there's one reason why this kind of differs. So if you're going there for 11 months, then you're going to be getting some special training, meaning you're going to be either a sergeant that gets his own team, or you're going to be a driver, meaning you need some extra training to learn how to drive the trucks and get all of the truck driver's licenses and everything in order. And pretty much if you're the 8-month guy, then the 11-month sergeants that are only now trained up to be team leaders, you will be basically filling in the ranks and the teams. So you're gonna be more these kind of standard foot soldiers filling in the ranks. But something I found interesting here when looking at the list of the 49 countries. First of all, that there's actually so many of them, but also there's countries like Chad here, and of course friendly North Korea and Sweden. So it's a very interesting collection of countries that has mandatory military service. So back going into the story of how I ended up here. So being forced into the army is kind of like a strong word. It's kind of like, well, it's mandatory, so you have to go, right? But already when I was a kid, I knew I wanted to learn filmmaking, study film. And when I finished high school at the age of 19, I knew I might as well go to the army straight away. So then after when I finish my army service, I can immediately go to the school, start, building my own career, maybe start a business or whatever. So I didn't want anything to come up afterwards. Everybody has to do it. But I actually volunteered to go earlier rather than accidentally getting a letter that, hey, show up. And I'm actually very glad that I did that, because we had a couple of people in the army who were about 25, 26-year-olds. It actually was really tough for them because they already have families, careers, kids. To then join the army and kind of disappear for 11 months, it's not that short of a time. And also, you're not really getting paid a lot while being in the military service. So depending on the ranks that you are, you're either gonna be paid $100 per month as a foot soldier if you do go up the ranks. So if you do the 11 months after your special training, like 5 to 6 months in, you might upgrade to $175 per month. But if you haven't saved anything up, if your wife doesn't earn enough or doesn't work at all, then it's very tricky to get by, because also a lot of that money is spent up actually just buying more goodies for yourself that you can kind of be more comfortable while you're serving your I was about to say while you're serving your sentence, while you're serving your time in the army for your country. Another reason why I wanted to volunteer was then I could get to choose which kind of battalion I go to. There's all around the country many places that they might just kind of ship you to, but I just wanted to go to the one that was closest to my hometown, because if then some family wanted to come visit, it would be also a shorter distance, and also the close one was considered one of the more elite battalion, so it was also exciting to be part of like a cooler, more badass squad of people. But then jumping into more, I guess, the delicacies of what happens actually. So first, basically, you need to go through a medical examination. When you go there, the first thing they give you is actually personality test to see actually kind of like, are you fitting to be a sergeant? Are you fitting to be a driver or a foot soldier, to kind of map out where in the army structure you could lie, I guess, to make the life a little bit easier for them and kind of estimate like how many people to recruit and where to kind of put them. Again, I had more decision making there because I just volunteered to go, so that was awesome. But but talking about medical examinations, that's kind of where the fun begins. So this is like the first chance for a lot of people to try to weasel their way out of the military service. And actually this recently somehow became a business after a guy went trending on TikTok. There's this guy called Army Law, which pretty much they say here that, if I just translate to English here, a legal opportunity to escape military service in Estonia, 100% guarantee. It sounds super sketchy and scammy. There have been some news articles about it. I have no idea if it actually works or not. Sounds very shady. Pretty much the pitch seems to be pay us $1,000 and then you don't have to go to the military service ever, which seems very strange. But talking about then the medical examinations, a lot of people who don't want to go and serve in the army, this is where they start to pitch, you know. Oh, my back hurts. Oh, my knee hurts. Oh, I'm sick. I can't come to the medical evaluation. Some people will pretty much pretend that they have gone mentally insane. And also when I was there, it's very interesting to see how pretty much like completely young, able-bodied dudes just looked like a bunch of grannies in there, just kind of trying to weasel themselves out. Also, to me, it felt a bit that a lot of this was kind of like for the show, because when I went to do my check, I thought the idea of doing the medical check was that, are you actually healthy enough to serve in the army? And when they asked me like, hey, you know, how do you feel? What's up? I also mentioned that, you know, I've had big ankle issues previously from a lot of basketball injuries. So I mentioned that and the medical person pretty much told me like, well, you volunteered to go yourself, right? So why are you complaining? Don't you want to go? Which then I was like, what? I thought that this is a good chance to check if there's something wrong with me, and I, you know, if I go, that nothing like worse will happen. Which seems that, you know, who cares really? But of course then they also do like a couple of I guess mandatory tests as well to make sure, you know, your heart is fine and so on and so forth. Another interesting piece was the psych evaluation, what happened, which is pretty much the psych evaluation for me was I went into a room, there was a doctor sitting behind the desk, and the doctor looked at me and was like, how old you are? I was like, 19. What do you do? I was like, well, I just finished school. Now joining the army. After that, looking to go study film. Where do you study? I told the school's name because I guess when I went there, I actually wasn't fully finished with my studies. And then the final question was, okay, so do you have anything to tell to me? And I was like, nope, I don't think so. And I was done. I guess now I'm allowed to pick up live ammunition, put it in a weapon and point it at things. Medical evaluation over. We go towards the first day of actually arriving in the army. When you go, first of all, you're put on a bus. They send you to the military base and basically they tell you that you should bring a couple of things with you as well. So here's like a list of things that you should bring with you. Pretty much you don't really have to worry about equipment. Everything that you need they will have for you. It's just kind of a couple of nice goodie things that, you know, if you want some extra sweet or chocolate stuff to keep you going while you're in the forest, maybe extra pair of socks is kind of nice to just kind of make your life a little bit easier. And only thing I would say really that they didn't give is a watch, so that's something that eventually I had to have brought in myself. Then they put you on a bus, you do a bunch of paperwork again. For some reason, we did that personality thing again for some reason there. Funny enough is that doing the personality test, it seemed that I didn't match for anything. I didn't match for the sergeant role apparently because I wasn't harsh enough, and for some reason also I wasn't too fitting for the driver's role, which was also kind of weird and funny. I think it was like either a 5 or 10 point system, and with both of them I ranked in the middle, which was like kind of low tendency towards that. No idea why, it actually didn't seem to matter at all. And this is where now you start to get more and more into the military army machine, where they really started this intimidation process with people. Basically, you have like a full battalion. There's gonna be different kind of platoon leaders that pick soldiers for their own platoons. Then either you're gonna go to like a communication team, or like the team that kind of maintains the vehicles, cooks the food, or you go more towards like the foot soldier platoon that really does the heavy fighting. And it's really funny to go there because pretty much like these really bulky, huge leaders, they just sit there, and in front of me there were like one guy was like a little like quite chubby, and the other guy was really short, kind of like a geeky looking, and they would like roast them and try to rip them apart. Like one of those guys pretty much like walked in front of them, and they were like, "What the hell I'm gonna do with you? Can you even carry a weapon if I'm gonna tell you to run that direction? Can you like run further than 10 feet?" Just making kind of even like sometimes harsh or rude kind of comments. And I guess that was the first shock therapy or like shock value that they wanted to put, that hey guys, you're now in the military and discipline starts today, no more messing around. I've noticed in my life some weird stuff tends to happen all the time around me, so my process was a little bit different. They tried to intimidate me as well, but they kind of failed for a really odd reason. So pretty much I got in there, I was like, "Who are you? What do you do?" I was like, Matthias, I pretty much just did school and came here voluntarily. They're like, "Okay, so who do you want to be?" And I was like, I didn't know I get to choose, but I had previously seen in some army newsletter they were looking for like media soldiers. So I was like, I want to be a media soldier. And they were like, "No, you can't." And then for some reason this sparked a big argument amongst those 5 leaders themselves, that can he become a media soldier? First of all, what is a media soldier? They were asking me like, "Where did you hear about this?" I was like, "Well, this was like an official document that you guys sent me, so I don't know, that's what I want to do, that's what I want to be." And then finally I understood that yes, you can be a media soldier, but not in this battalion where I actually went. It happened on another side of Estonia, but they were pretty much just for like a whole 5 minutes arguing with each other. Sometimes like one of them would be like, "Hey, do you like do sports?" And I was like, "Yeah, I play basketball." And he's like, "Oh, okay, good." And then at a random point one of them was like, yeah, I'll just take him. And that's how I ended up in my platoon. After that, they basically organized you, and that's when you get your equipment. There's like a huge list of stuff that they will give you. In the beginning it looks super overwhelming because they actually like tell you as well. It's like, "Hey, if you lose anything, you have to freaking pay for it, unless it's worn out and broken, and you didn't lose it, then they will just replace it for you. But if you lose it, you have to pay for it." And eventually it got even worse because if you lost something, it also gave a chance that they wouldn't let you out on the weekends, because after you did kind of basic trainings, you were sometimes allowed to go out on the weekends as well. But pretty much here's like a whole list of stuff that you would get, but after a while you actually kind of memorized everything, and it wasn't a big deal anymore. The next step was shaving your head. Like there's different kind of rules of like what you are supposed to look like in the military service. Pretty much you have to be fully shaved, hair has to be really short. There's also a reason for this. It's because if you're gonna be weeks on end in the forest and you have really long hair, it's gonna get very dirty and diseases and stuff can happen. So there's actually a very good reason why you need to shave it off, because it's much easier to clean and make sure you actually don't get sick. So it's important to actually shave and do those sort of things. It's not just for the sake of doing it. But then, my military service actually began. This is one of the first pictures I took on my first field mission out as a dumpling. So what does it mean to be a dumpling? So in my military service, you had to really prove yourself to be, I guess, earn the title of being amongst that battalion. And here basically you can see that this emblem over here is empty. It's just black and nothing in it, and that pretty much means that you're a dumpling. In the beginning stages, nothing really matters much in that case. Being a dumpling is completely normal. The only thing then what happens is you start to get quite a lot of hard time from the rest of the people who are serving time if you don't go through your exams and you still stay a dumpling. Basically, if you fail any of your exams, you will stay a dumpling, and people are going to make fun of you a ton. And it's also not that easy that you can just like kind of take the exam again. There's certain times when you can take exams, and if you failed an exam, it can take up to months to try to become not a dumpling. Things get especially tricky if you're also learning to become a sergeant, because you can't actually become a sergeant or like a higher ranking level if you are not even like a fully emblemed non-dumpling. So this is me learning a little bit about how to camo myself. Decorated here pretty much myself like a damn Christmas tree, and that's where it started. The basic training for me pretty much was 3 months. During that time, there's no going home. I did get a bit lucky there again. You know, I told special weird things happened to me. But in the 30 days, they kind of looked at who's like the couple of like the best performers in the group, because I was always really active on taking kind of the leader role, when people would or like the commanders would ask, it's like, you know, who wants to do this or who wants to take that. I was always kind of like putting myself out there and be like, yep, I can lead the team, or like, yep, I can figure this problem out. I guess that's why they chose that I got my first weekend out already earlier, so 1 month in, but still afterwards, the 2 months later, I had to be in there and wouldn't get home during the beginner training periods. That was really the most intense training period as well, because the sergeants who were training us, they were really messing with us a lot, and that's where the first team building exercises started too. And funny that you should say that. Our first like actual team building exercise was all about making your bed. Yes, making your bed. Because in the army, everything is about structure and discipline and order. Then we would, in our battalion, live in bunk beds. So let's say there's a bunk bed here, a bunk bed here, bunk bed here. Oh no, my paint skills are not very great. But these are bunk beds, and pretty much how you would make your bed, it needed to be perfect. So basically you need to have your pillow here, you needed to fold the bed sheets perfectly, where this section was like 15 centimeters, this section was 15 centimeters, and all of these foldings with the rest of the beds, they all needed to be aligned as well. So basically you needed to work as a team to make sure that everybody's beds were made up perfectly. They were all aligned. They all had the same 15 and 15 centimeter foldings. There were no wrinkles or anything. And since it was a bunk bed as well, and they were relatively nearby each other, so let's make this into a bunk bed. Then there wasn't a lot of room to here moving around as well. Pretty much like one person at a time could really make the bed, and they would make it incredibly short amount of time when you had to make the beds. So they would give you like, okay, you have 45 seconds to make your bed, which pretty much ended up being the first team exercise, because the only way that you could actually do it within that time frame was that if you with your bunkmate, I guess, would work together of making the one bed and then making the second bed. And if anybody around you needed extra help, you would jump in if you were faster and helping them get ready as well. And pretty much how it would happen is you would be outside your room. In the room, there would be like 20 people living there. Everybody would be outside the room. The sergeants would go and mess up your beds. Blow a whistle, 45 seconds, you had to rush to the bed. Everyone makes the beds and rush out. Even if one person failed, if one person's bed wasn't made properly, everybody had to do it again. And this is actually how we kind of naturally started to do this teamwork, because and at first everybody would make their own bed, and there was always be somebody who didn't make it, and then other people would get pissed at them, and then people would be figuring out that, hey, I can help you, and hey, we can do this together, and then we can help that. And that's how the first kind of team plays started. Going back to this, we also did do a lot of cleaning. We even called ourselves pretty much like mob soldiers, and the cleaning had to be very thorough, especially when it came to cleaning our guns. Once you shoot live ammunition, there's going to be a lot of dust and oil and everything around those weapons. So when you pull it up, in the beginning, our sergeants would go put in like a white glove, and they would put their finger as deep as possible in the weapon, and if there was any dust, you would have to do it again, and it was very brutal in the beginning. Other kind of exercises and stuff we would do would also revolve around like how to act, how to march, do those proper military activities as well. How to use a weapon. Probably for the first 2 months, we never shot anything, not even blanks, not live ammunition. All of the training was just to learn muscle memory. It's like, safety on, shoot, how to reload, how to empty the gun, how to make sure it's safe when it's live, how to act with it. We would do a lot of routines about those things. And then finally, we would have this thing called Death by PowerPoint, where we would learn a lot about health and safety things when it comes to being in the army, and just about like training about like the army tactics, and learning about the enemy and the equipment they use, and how pretty much everything works, and kind of, lecture type learning. But you know how in school teachers always tell you that don't put too much text on your presentations, because then you're just gonna read, and reading makes the presentation boring. For some reason, everybody who's in the army never learned that, or never had heard anything about it. So that's why they started to calling it, even the lecturers who gave those presentations told it, this is death by PowerPoint, because they would have these massive balls of text. They would sit in a huge hall, and they would just read the damn presentation, and people would fall asleep. They would have to do laps around the building. It was very tiring, and pretty much this would create our first kind of real routines as well. So our basics kind of daily life, what it would look like would be that we wake up in the morning, we do exercise, we do go to breakfast, then we have our classes, we do lunch, we have more classes, we have dinner, evening counting, and we also have to every evening sing the national anthem. If we were in the military base, of course, we wouldn't do that in the forest. And then there would be cleaning, and then showering, and then we would go to sleep. Waking up was relatively early, but also sleep time was also quite early as well. I believe we went to sleep at like 10. Wake up time was at 6 in the morning. In the forest, we would have no time off. In the military base, you would have your own kind of time off, 1 hour per day. Typically, you aren't allowed to use any of phones or anything, but that's then 1 hour to yourself that you can then do kind of whatever. Like, yes, you can use your phone, you can watch some TV. To be honest, in the first months of you being there, you actually don't have time for personal time, because whenever you had some task that wasn't fully finished, it could have been even like cleaning your weapon or whatever. If it wasn't done properly, it would eat away from your free time. And in the beginning, actually, like, we wouldn't have a lot of proper free time, because we would be doing something else during that time. And actually, a lot of our routines would just go about food time. Pretty much immediately after I had breakfast, I started to wait for lunch. After I had lunch, I immediately started waiting for dinner. And once I had dinner, I was already thinking about, oh my God, can't wait for breakfast. Doesn't matter where if we were gonna be in the forest or if we were gonna be in the military base, because it was a lot of routine and tedious work. That's how my life pretty much in there was. A couple of other things, interesting things we would learn in the army was going to the bathroom in the forest. It's relatively straightforward, I would say. You basically, in your equipment, you have a small shovel. You would dig a hole, you would do your thing, and then you would cover it up. The problem with that is that a lot of the training grounds are quite often used throughout the years. Sometimes people would go to the bathroom in the forest and they would dig up somebody else's thing from, I don't know, years ago, or maybe not. So that was kind of awful. There is some level of peace actually going to the bathroom in the forest. I don't know what's about that. And the second thing also, they teach you to clean yourself in the forest, which is strange. A lot of people actually didn't like end up cleaning themselves like that, because people would just go out and buy baby wipes, and if you were for a long time in the forest, we would just clean ourselves with baby wipes every evening or morning. But pretty much how they teach you like how you should properly be washing yourself while you're in the army is actually you have your small little jug of water where you drink. The idea is that you would take a sip of your drink to the mouth, you would spit it on your hands, and then you would do washing of your strategic or critical areas. The main reason why that happens is because you don't want to waste resources, which means you don't want to waste water, because sometimes if you're gonna be out in the forest for a long time, things can happen. Never know when you're gonna find another fresh supply of water. So that's what they would do. Typically in our training exercises, we had plenty of water to go by, so that wasn't really a big deal, and didn't have to actually properly, I guess, wash ourselves like that. Though baby wipes were a killer. And then a final funny saga, which a lot of our friends in the army started to notice. So I mentioned that army or military service here is compulsory for men. Women don't have to do it. Women can do it. When I went there were, I think, 5 or 6 women who joined us, 2 actually finished. And for women, during the first 3 months, they can choose whether or not they actually want to do the training. I believe the first ones who joined quit in the first 2 weeks. And then a couple other ones quit within the first months. And pretty much 2 women stayed after the training period, which means now you're actually like officially in the army database or like army structure, so you can't go out anymore anyway. And I believe as well they actually didn't want to as well. They actually wanted to be in the army, and if I'm not mistaken, one of them ended up like becoming like a full-time military personnel. My team was never around them, but the funny thing happened. Well, you're just living there for months with a bunch of dudes, and the guys would start chatting that every day that went by for those first 3 months, that the kitchen ladies, we pretty much had some like old big kitchen ladies working there giving us food that would be probably like twice our age. And it would be so funny how how the people that we served with started talking about that. Hey, like, I don't know, every time we go and eat, it's kitchen ladies, they just start to turn more attractive. And I guess that's what army will do for you then, if you're gonna have to sit for 3 months in the forest with a bunch of dudes. But now, let's go on to upgrading myself from being a dumpling to like an actual army person. So what happens is that in order to become then a non-dumpling and get your emblem, you have to do a ton of exams. I believe it was 14 exams. That's a lot about more practical exams, like how to handle the weapon. There's shooting exams as well, that you don't kind of fire all over the place. And also there's more theoretical exams that you have to do as well, where it's kind of like a SAT test. And then you also have a physical exam, which we call the NATO test. Basically, there'll be 3 exercises depending on your age. You would have to do push-ups, sit-ups, and run within a certain time frame. Based on then how many you did or how fast you run, you get a certain amount of points. I was so close to getting the perfect score. I think I missed 3 points because instead of doing properly 69 push-ups, I believe I did 67, so I missed 2, which means I missed my 3 points, and I got 297 points in my first NATO exam. And then pretty much it's the time when I would upgrade myself to being a non-dumpling. That's where you get the emblem. In my battalion we had the skull. There's actually a bunch of history related to this, where this skull came from as well. Basically, in the olden World War times, we would have this battalion basically hiding in the forest and wreaking havoc to the occupants in our country. And they were relatively feared, and pretty much we were the only battalion that also covers our left side of the arm with the emblem. Typically it's happened on the right side. Why is that? Well, most of us are going to be right-handed. So if you are carrying a weapon, then the left shoulder would show the emblem towards the enemy, and the skull would kind of resonate itself with striking fear to the enemy, especially back in those days when this emblem was very much feared amongst the occupying ranks. And it was a very actually special moment of earning it and going through the whole blood and sweat to get it. So basic training over, time to go to my special military training then. So that was the moment when you were going to be chosen, or because I was 11 months there, I was going to be chosen to become either a sergeant, team leader, or a car driver. And actually first when I went to the army, I was thinking that, it might be smart to just go and become a car driver, because I might also get like the truck's driver's license and it's gonna be free for me then. Why wouldn't I do that? Because there's no downside, and then I could use those licenses afterwards, after I've done my military service. But while being in the army, I started to kind of, I guess, somewhat enjoy the leadership aspect of things as well. Some of it was relatively stupid, I guess. It comes again back to the discipline, where if you wanted to even speak to your higher rank, you had to request permission from them. So you would go to them, it's like, hey, Foot Soldier Marcus, please may I address? And they would say, usually, yes, go ahead. And then you would say whatever is wrong or what you wanted to discuss with them. And when you then wanted to finish the engagement, you would say, am I allowed to leave? And then you would say yes, and then you would be on your way again. Or whenever a higher ranking officer would enter your room, you all had to be like attending and saluting them, which was also quite interesting. I didn't want people to do that for me, but I kind of started to enjoy more so like decision making as well when it came to like doing certain exercises, because otherwise you just kind of following the direction of, your leader is like, go that way, get shot in that direction. Then at least, if something happened, then I could be the one and be like, hey, we're gonna go get shot in that direction, instead of following someone else's thing. But the main thing there was that my own kind of superior came to me and asked what I want to do, and I was like, maybe like a car driver, and they pretty much was like, what? No, you are sergeant material, and that's where I was becoming a sergeant immediately. After when we started our training, we found out that car guys did have a relatively easier life, because they were in the military base, basically learning whatever driving theory and doing the licensing and driving. And we heard that almost every night they would just have sauna. Meanwhile, we were mostly on the field learning to train and run offensive and defensive positions, and it was a lot of training. And the biggest kind of challenge actually became in order to get the 2 stripes. But the 2 stripes meant that I was now a sergeant, so I was a higher ranking officer now. And in order to get that in our battalion was a 100-kilometer walk, which is 62.1371 miles for you American folks. But the trick there was, it wasn't just that you had to walk that distance, but you had to walk that distance with your whole equipment. Before that, you had like weeks of training camp, so you're already exhausted. And in between that 100-kilometer walk, you would have different exercises as well, whether it's like run and carry landmines. On the map, there was a missing section, so you had to put together like a puzzle to know where you had to go next, or pull out a truck from a ditch. And that was probably like one of the hardest things that I've ever, like physically hardest things that I've ever done in my life. Actually mentally as well, because a lot of physical pushing is mental. And I remember the extreme pain when I was walking, and it's so interesting how far we can actually push our bodies do certain things. When I was walking there, I remember the pain was so extremely painful, but at a certain point you kind of get used to the pain, because I remember when you started walking, we walked close to like, I don't know, 30 hours straight. We took a couple of breaks here and then, max 5-minute breaks, because if you did a longer break, I guess something with the blood circulation or something would happen within, like in the legs. So if you did longer than a 5-minute break, like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you wouldn't be able to walk again, because the excruciating pain that happened then was just extreme. So we would sometimes do 5-minute breaks. But yeah, the pain got so bad that at some point you just got used to it, and you were like, yeah, I don't know, my legs are hurting and it's really painful, but well, what are you gonna do? If they're gonna be painful, they're gonna be painful, but I just gotta keep walking, and that's what we're doing because I don't want to go back without my stripes. I had, again, as me being a little bit magical special at the time, I just had managed to got sick beforehand, and I was really worried that they wouldn't let me go and do that trip because I was sick and I had fever, but I somehow got lucky. Probably wasn't a good thing considering my health. They had some new doctors, I guess doctor students that would come to the army, and they sent me to do like the evaluation. And I guess I've kind of charmed my way out of it, where I told the person, they asked like, how am I feeling and blah, blah, blah. And then I asked for some meds, and they approved me for, I don't know actually why they approved me, but they approved me that I can go do that. And while I was still first 10 hours of the journey there, I was still taking medicine for my fever, which also wasn't great. I also used a trick to do a better job on that or distract me. So I volunteered myself to become the point man, the leader in, well, not the leader in the group, but the person in the group who would read the map. And that was awesome for me as well, actually going through that process, because I didn't actually have time too much to worry about whether my legs were hurting or not, because I would just read the map, and that would distract my mind a lot into where I was going and what that my legs were painful. There are other tricks as well that you can play with your mind to go through such big processes. A lot of the times what I would do is that I would start singing songs in my head, or I would just start counting to keep your mind occupied that you can go through these extreme amounts of pain. Yeah, and then the cool thing was that you're allowed to go out mostly on the weekends unless we were on the field doing the training. So I got to go home, play some video games, relax, meet with friends. A lot of people would have a lot of drinks on the weekends and party. I didn't want to do that because I wanted to get some rest. Of course, sometimes we would party, and that's when I finally then ranked up and became a sergeant. There was one picture I also wanted to show. This isn't like anything extreme, but you would often see people with these kind of things, like taped up feet. This guy, I believe here, had actually like a very extreme case after that 100-kilometer walk, where pretty much his skin was peeling completely off. Like, I've never seen anything like that. I have a picture of that, but I can't show it because YouTube will probably crush me then. But pretty much you can imagine there is no skin, it's just red flesh and meat. That was my experience of then becoming an actual sergeant. And then there was a time where everybody got allocated into like proper teams. While they were special training us, they also started to train the new recruits, those 8-month dudes. And once those 8-month dudes were properly recruited out, that's when they would push them to our teams as well. So basically our guys would get their own teams from those 8-month dudes then. And it seems as well that there's a reason why they kept us separate. Also think it might be smart for them to also keep the sergeants and truck drivers potentially a bit separate as well, because we did notice a weird kind of power shift or dynamic happen, where if you're a driver, you are not going to be ranking up to the tier 1 sergeant level. So what happens then is that technically you are still kind of treated on the same level as the 8-month dudes. But the problem now happens that you went through the 3 months of basic training with those guys, and those guys are still kind of like your buddies, which became tricky a little bit in the beginning if you had to treat some of those guys the same way. There was no leniency towards them. Sometimes they would try to play around. Oh yeah, don't mess with me. We are mates. But it doesn't work like that. It's also kind of tough. But I also see why. Also, we didn't train together at all with those 8-month guys, because they were just assigned over to us afterwards. So there would be, I guess, this again hierarchy a little bit and discipline within the ranks in the military structure. There are some positive and some negative things that I would kind of want to summarize. So I think it was really cool to see like how far I can really push my body in the sergeant trainings. We haven't had one of our leaders tell us that his motto was pretty much like, pain is temporary, but glory is forever. And I did feel that, that a lot of the pain and suffering that you go through is temporary, and eventually you can get something awesome done, and then that glory stays with you. You're now a sergeant. You now are not a dumpling anymore, or whatever it may be. I think a lot of this applies also for our everyday lives as well. Second thing is independence. I think it's very good for a bunch of guys as well, especially if you hear stuff happening in the news. I think I was kind of like an early boomer there when I was already 15. I was like, I want to be out of the house and I want to, live my own independent life, where it seems that that's not often the case. A lot of, adults even now are still living with their parents, and in the army, nobody will wash your clothes for you. Nobody will feed you. Nobody will do anything for you. You're responsible for your own thing. So I think for a lot of young men, it is also a good thing to kind of push them suddenly into that, force them to that independent lifestyle. There's also some moments that are really fun. I think I really enjoyed city battles actually, because they're more intense, more strategic. Especially had fun training together with other NATO member countries. Like we had Germans and US people run trainings with us. That was super fun. And I think one positive for me was also that actually related to food. Army food is relatively terrible, especially if you go to the army, like in the forest, and you have to eat those MRE or ready meals kind of, and cook those things up. Whereas I was a really fussy eater before going into the army, but in the army it was kind of like you either eat or starve to death. So then I didn't have a choice, where I was forced to kind of practice eating normal people's food. And now I'm actually I almost eat everything, which is like an infinite gain, where I think I also ate relatively unhealthily before, where back in that day I wouldn't eat any salads or sauces or anything. It was pretty much like meat and potatoes. That was it. That was my diet, or macaroni and cheese. And to cover maybe some negatives of being in the army, I think there's a lot of pointless downtime. I believe why it happens is that we are not the only ones being trained. Our commanders or leaders were actually the guys who had maybe recently come out from the military university, and everybody is kind of continually going up the ranks and moved around, so everybody's continually training. That for the foot soldiers means that once somebody big head somewhere is doing their training, you're just waiting behind a rock somewhere freezing. So that wasn't super fun. That is so much downtime. Very funny thing there is that they're actually talking now about potentially extending the military service in Estonia and making it longer, which I find a little bit ridiculous, because basically then what you're saying is that, hey, this process is inefficient, just let's do it for longer. Like that's gonna fix anything if they're gonna do better training, I guess. For the sake of doing a better training, like getting more experience for soldiers, sure, but I don't think doing it longer is an answer. I think there's a lot of things you can do more efficiently within the ranks. Even I remember last 2 weeks in the army were completely pointless. We literally did nothing, and you're also allowed to do, like, you're not allowed to do anything as well, because you only have your dedicated 1 hour slots when you're allowed to touch your phone, for example. So that was that's kind of annoying. A lot of downtime. The death by PowerPoint thing is completely ridiculous, and the aspect of super low pay, like you're not gonna feed your family for $100 per month. That's just ridiculous. And what I noticed about myself was actually in the army I kind of became a little bit of a person who I didn't want to become. I felt like I was two different people. While I was outside the army I was like kind of one person, and when I was in the army I was kind of this other person. I really noticed I become kind of this angry sergeant. And why this happened is that it's again due to that hierarchy and discipline, where if somebody under you messes up, that means you messed up, and that a little bit then segues over to some of the dangers as well of being in the army. There have been some cases, not when I was there, when somebody got shot, and I believe some people have also died in the service. Very rare though, but it has happened. We actually had one incident where a guy set another guy on fire by accident. Let's pull up my coloring board here again, and this was actually happened. They do a bunch of training, they warn about it a lot of the times, but I guess these things still happen. But pretty much it was related to cooking. So how we cook is pretty much like there's this thing, it's like a circular thing, and you would pour alcohol in it, and you would pull a match and you would light it on fire. So there would be fire here, and then there would be like this kind of foldable thing that goes on top of it, and then you can put your cooking bowl here where you can then put your food in and then cook it. The problem with this fire here is that, well, typically, you know, fire burns like yellow, orange, red, or whatever, because if you use a certain kind of alcohol there, that doesn't happen. You don't see the light, and the problem is that sometimes when the heat goes lower or your alcohol kind of burns out and when you're making food, is that you think that it's empty and it's not on fire anymore because, well, you can't see the fire and your food isn't cooking anymore. The thing is that actually it is still on fire, it's just very low. So before you, I guess, reignite the fire, or before you top up with additional alcohol, you first must make sure you kill the fire completely. There's certain techniques for that. You just kind of smother the fire, and then you also have to wait till the thing in general cools down a little bit, because if you pour in more alcohol, if the thing is just hot, even if it's not on fire, it may catch fire. And that's what happened in that incident where a guy went there, poured some alcohol on it, caught fire. He freaked out because his big alcohol bottle caught fire. He threw it away in panic, and basically next to him was another guy who was drowsed in alcohol that's on fire, and pretty much guy just wholly set on fire. I wasn't in the group who were cooking there, but I was quite like near it, and like we didn't know what to do. We also a little bit panicked. We started pouring a lot of water on him. He was in crazy pain. Now back knowing that we shouldn't have probably done that, but it was also like the only thing we could do to kind of try to keep calm him afterwards. We got an ambulance, drew him out of the forest. We actually just sat him in a lake so that he would get some fresh cold stuff on him to help the body cool down. He had eventually second-degree burns, I believe, on the face and on the body. The face recovered actually quite well. But yeah, the first thing when the ambulance got there, they just shot morphine in him and they wrapped him up like a mummy, basically. So yeah, that was that. Another thing as well, actually, which isn't, I guess, that dangerous, but it's interesting how in the winter times it can get super cold. Let's go back to my drawing board here. It gets super cold. We have this kind of tarp things. So basically there would be a tree. Okay, let's say this is a tree and this is another tree. And basically we would have these tarp things that we would put up, tied to the tree, and this is the tarp, and then we would crawl in there and we would then set up our mattress under here. So there would be a mattress, and basically we would crawl in here and sleep here. Cool thing now, well, the interesting thing now, when it got really cold, and especially it also can rain outside and you can get really wet. The thing is, like, well, we don't have washers and dryers in the forest, so how do we dry our clothes? So a hack here is that you are actually warmer in a sleeping bag with your clothes off rather than clothes on. And if you want to a little bit dry your clothes, the idea is that you take your clothes off, you stuff them on the side of your sleeping bag, and basically your body heat that circulates within the sleeping bag would then start to dry also the clothes a little bit. Of course, it's not perfect. You're not going to be like completely dried in the morning, but relatively. And then if you after a couple hours you wear the clothes, you're gonna be relatively dry afterwards. So now, having talked about the positives and negatives, actually the army journey doesn't end after you are in the military service. Actually, I am still considered, I guess you would call, like active reserve. So technically I'm still, if somebody calls, sometimes they would still call us up for like additional special training. There's also a lot of interesting stuff that happens there where like I at some point had some health problems as well. I couldn't go, but it's also funny how some of these rules also seem to be like sometimes are being followed, sometimes aren't. Where I know like when you go to the additional health check, it seems also that they ask people like, do you actually want to go to the additional training? Because again, people have families and stuff like that. So then sometimes people like if you get a nice person, I guess, in the health checkup, they will just ask you, it's like, well, do you want to go? And then if you tell them no, then they will just mark you down. Okay, health not good, don't go. But yeah, after the service, you're still in reserve, and if something now happens, I would be called, and then I would have to go. Or even if it doesn't, like nobody ever like attacks us or anything, still there might be these additional training things that if they call, you have to go. Otherwise, you can be criminally fined, as I mentioned, as I mentioned in the beginning. And I guess finally, like the important question is, can we actually protect ourselves? And after seeing what's been happening in Ukraine, I believe so. Before that, we had a lot of jokes, actually, with the army guys, or memes that said that, before I went to the army, I was able to sleep really well, knowing that we were protected. When I went to the army, I couldn't sleep because I was the one protecting. And after the army, I couldn't sleep because I know who was doing the protecting. And that joke actually came from because, I think people don't realize also right now in the Ukraine situation where it's normal to have a lot of chaos in the army. We would often play different kind of scenarios down as well, and a lot of confusion can happen while there's fighting going around. So that's completely normal. And after seeing what's happened, in Ukraine and how Russia is performing, because who else is gonna attack Estonia? It's well, Finland isn't gonna do it, Latvia isn't gonna do it, Sweden I doubt is gonna come to us. So pretty much it's only going to be Russia. And seeing what's happening in Ukraine, I'm quite confident in our military discipline structure that we can put up a good defense until the rest of the countries in the NATO can come to our help. And before I give my full summary on this, I wanted to mention a little bit about dog tags, which I realized that a lot of people actually don't know about dog tags much. They are in video games, in Battlefield. It's a common thing where you kind of melee an enemy, you pull off their dog tags and you can collect them. I know Call of Duty has had some game modes as well where you get those dog tags. But what is a dog tag actually? So you can see my army uniform here. This is the dog tag. I know in games often you see that they're in pair of two. Typically they are actually a pair of two. For us, it's actually one piece, but you can see that there's a section here that breaks off. So pretty much there's still two. It can be broken off to two pieces, and it just comes with the same information. So what's actually then on that? So on that you have your personal identification number, your nationality, blood type, and religion. If you are not religious, then it's just gonna say none, and that's it. The idea behind that is it pretty much is for identification. So if you're fallen on the battlefield, this can be taken away. Why there's two is that things can sometimes happen where your body can't be pulled out. Whatever happens, there at least is one that's being taken away and one that always must be on your person. And I guess then now it's the time for my kind of final summary about this. So given the choice to go to the military service, I think I would say I wouldn't go, because 11 months is a long time and you can get a lot of stuff done in 11 months. Even if you live to be 100, that's a whole percentage of your life. And think, how much stuff you can do with your own life within the 11 months. However, I would consider it as one of these types of experiences that's I'm glad I did it, but I probably wouldn't do it again. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.